I'm an Arctic researcher for the United States, and I don't even know who the imposters are anymore. Written by Whorley. Me and Fink stood in the hallway looking at Dawn crouched over the twitching body of Jones. An infinity of silence stretched between us. Dawn wore a wicked smile, and for the first time, I understood the possibilities that polar madness could offer. "What have you done?" That was Fink. My words were still caught somewhere in the back of my throat. I was hyper-focused on the dead face of my friend. "What are you talking about?" asked Dawn. "I got one of those things. Look at it." He stood and offered the head of Jones out for us to see more clearly. "I don't think that's one of them," I spoke. "Look at it," said Dawn. There was a long pause before he let the severed head thump to his feet. I don't know what's going on here." His words were soft, lingering, insane. "I'm the only real one left, aren't I?" He cocked his head to the side as though he was waiting for some kind of response. "You need to calm the hell down," said Fink. "You've already killed one of us." He motioned to the dead body. "Look, snap out of it." Dawn took a step towards us, forcing a flinch out of me. I didn't want to be anywhere near him. "Don't come any closer," I said. "Hey," said Dawn. "If you're the real you, you shouldn't have any issues being near me." I could see in his eyes that he'd already made up his mind. He didn't think that we were real. "Just back up, Dawn," I said. "Please don't come any closer." "Just let me get a good look at you," he responded. "I want to make sure you're all human." He took another step forward. "I'm effing serious. Stay away from us," I said. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to fight him off with Fink leaning on me, so I shifted around to hand my lantern off to the older man. I'd be able to whack him with the hammer if it seriously came down to it, but I did not want it to come to that. Dawn moved quickly, charging us. Without any other options, I shoved Fink off my shoulders so that he bounced off the wall and fell to the floor. Dawn came straight for me, wielding his hacksaw in his right hand. His left hand came out for my throat. I swung the hammer, and it met his groping left hand. He let out a howl and swung the hacksaw at me. If he were able to grapple me, I was sure that his superior strength would win out. I ducked, feeling the hacksaw catch my hood. Without thinking, and only the driving force of adrenaline pumping through my muscles, I swung the hammer at his knee as hard as I could. It made a god-awful crunch, and he spun like a wild ballerina, falling and sliding down the stairs to the basement. I shimmied away from the landing of the stairs and found Fink still holding on to the lantern. We ran from the scene like we were in a three-legged race. All the while, Dawn screamed at us. His words echoed off the metal walls. "You can't leave me down here! They'll kill me!" We stepped around the body of Jones. Her blood pooled thickly around the spot where her head should have been. As Dawn's screams fell away into the distance, we slammed into the door of the canteen, huffing and out of breath. I shoved at the door. I could hear something inside the canteen. Shuffling feet could be heard as something or someone approached the other side of the door. The door swung open, leaving me and Fink to go flailing into the room, landing on our knees. The door slammed shut behind us. Looking around, I saw in the dim candlelight that the dogs were still there. Good. I twisted to see who it was that had shut the door. It was Jones. She was grinning. Next to her was Darling, and as I whipped my head around to the kitchen area, I saw Donovan munching on a snack cake. I moved to settle Fink into the mess of blankets and stood, "Thanks," he said, but as I caught his eye, I knew what he was thinking. I was thinking the same thing. How was any of this possible? I stood by Fink, pushing my back to the wall. "Are you all right?" asked Darling, hunkering down to check Fink's ankle. "I think so," said Fink. "Probably need to ice it." He seemed to think that this was funny because it was followed by a sick laugh. "What about you?" asked Jones. She was looking at me. "Are you okay?" She looked genuinely worried. What a master of infiltration those things must be. I almost believed it myself. Either way, I knew what she meant. I was shaking. I looked down at my hands. They were quivering. The hammer I held was splattered with Dawn's blood. At least, I thought that it was Dawn's blood. My eyes darted back to the Dawn standing on the opposite side of the room. "I'm good," I said. I watched them all, bug-eyed. I felt that at any moment, the creatures would spring into action. The wait was the worst part of it. Darling pushed up Fink's pant leg, exposing a red ankle that would inevitably purple over. "Why don't you put that thing down?" said Dawn, stepping over to inspect me. He was talking about my hammer. I don't really want to," I said. "You're among friends here. There's no reason for that," he responded. "You know what? I'm good, actually." I looked him over, hoping that there was some small thing that I could latch onto and notice that would give away the fact that he was in fact a doppelganger. "Come on." Don stepped over to reach for the hammer. I jerked away, his face bunched up. "Quit acting like a crazy person." "Leave Andrew alone," said Darling. Don winced at this and stepped away. "Fine, guess I'm always the bad guy." I choked out the words. "The last time I saw you, you were all burnt up." "Me?" said Donovan. "Really? Is that so?" "Yes, I threw you down the basement steps, so excuse me if I think that you might not be who you say you are." I shifted to look at Jones, and the last time I saw you, you had no head. Jones looked at me with a stunned expression. "Really? You don't trust me?" Darling was watching me. I could feel her eyes penetrating me. "There's got to be some kind of test, right?" she said. "There's always a test in the movies." "This isn't a movie," said Fink. The room went still except for the dogs. Steve, the curly-haired mutt, came over to stand near me. It felt good to have him nearby. If I could trust anyone, it felt like it was man's best friend, right? I petted him as Fink massaged his ankle. The other 3 people in the room took up on one of the bench tables near the kitchen, talking amongst themselves. Fink took one last swig from his flask and tossed it across the room, forcing the dogs to perk up their ears at the strange hollow metallic noise. "Empty," he grumbled. "This is bad, Andy," he whispered to me. "Yeah, how are we supposed to know who's who?" I said. "No idea." "Well, if they're really ninjin," I couldn't believe the words that were coming out of my mouth, "then there should be some sort of test, like Darling said, right?" "Hell if I know. I'm not a cryptozoologist." The tension in the room was swelling, and as the other 3 came over to sit near us, I could feel the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. An idea sprang to my mind. "Hey, Jones," I said. "Yeah?" she asked. "What's this dog's name?" I asked while still pointing to Steve. "That's Steve." A million thoughts ran through my mind. Think of something else. What's the capital of the United States?" "Washington, D.C.," she answered. "Okay, what's my favorite color?" I asked. How am I supposed to know that? You've never told me that. Oh, I guess not, I responded. Darling sprang into action. Andrew, calm your tits, all right? Jen is who she says she is. Yeah, and how can you tell that? I said. The only person that I can vouch for without a doubt is Fink over here. He's been with me the entire time. I could see the spark in Darling's eyes. She was getting pissed off. And how do we know that you two aren't the fakes? Hey, yeah, said Dawn. How do we know that you are who you say you are? A fantastic question, said Fink. No idea. He chuckled. You better kill us now. I wanted to reach over and throttle the senior researcher. We are real, I pleaded. There was a moment of silence. Since when did you two get so buddy-buddy? I asked while wiggling my finger between Darling and Dawn. Jones interjected. Now is not the time to start pointing fingers at each other. I think we're safe in here. You shouldn't have an effing head. I was shaking. I saw Dawn. Saw your head off. Jones glanced at Dawn. Is that right? Dawn laughed hysterically. What? Why the hell would I do something like that? I don't know, said Darling. You do strike me as the type that would fly off the handle, given the chance. F off, said Dawn as he crossed his arms. I don't know what vendetta you've got against veterans, but that needs to stop. You were in the military? Asked Jones. Well, yeah, said Dawn. The next words came out of his mouth very slowly. You know that. Everyone backed away from Jones, creating a semicircle around her. Darling was looking at her lover with wild skepticism. What? Said Jones, attempting to give a wry smile. All eyes were on her. I'll be damned, said Fink. Good try. Darling spoke with an edge to her words. Where did I grow up? Jones seemed to mull over the question. Darling lifted her spray canister and flicked her lighter on. What town did I grow up in, Jen? The cracking sadness in her voice was immeasurable. Please, said Jones. You know me. I love you. Blinding fire shot in a line from Darling to Jones. I shielded my eyes with a forearm and could barely make out Donovan in the commotion as he stumbled away. Jones's vocal cords ripped through the room and the dogs began barking. The smell of crackling flesh filled the room, and then came the smoke. I love you, I love you, I love you, screeched Jones. She threw open the door to the canteen and the billowing smoke went with her. She was a human torch. We stepped into the hallway, watching her run towards the entrance of the facility. She disappeared out of sight and her screams became echoes as we shut the door to the canteen once more. Darling was crying silently. Don sat on one of the tabletops watching his hands. I moved to Darling. I'm so sorry, I said. Shut up. Her voice was sharp. Just leave me alone, Andrew. We have to make a run for the chopper now, said Don. I regretfully agreed. He's right. I leaned against the wall near Fink. I don't think that I can fly in this storm, said Darling from a million miles away. Well, we've got to try, said Don. Why don't you try shutting your mouth, said Darling. Hey, I'm sorry, okay? But there are still people here we can save. You're a pilot. We need you. A long sigh fell out of Darling as her shoulders slumped. All right, okay. Fink tried sliding up the wall so that he could stand appropriately. He still favored his injured ankle. If we're going, I need to grab something from my room. "Are you kidding me?" said Don. "There are more important things to worry about than some trinket from your better days, old man." Fink glared, stone cold sober. "It's my wife's wedding ring." "I didn't know that you were married," I said. Fink closed his eyes. "She's been dead for some time." "Well, I'm not going with you, and I don't assume you'll be able to make it on your own with that ankle of yours," said Don. I studied Don's face. He seemed like the real deal, but after what had happened to Jones, I can't say that I knew anything for sure anymore. The next words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "I'll go with you, Fink." "Thank you." He wobbled over near me. "I think I can manage to walk on my own, just barely. Gotta be careful is all." "So, that means that we're splitting up again?" said Don. He clapped. "Fantastic idea. Great. Thanks a lot for that one." "It might be faster if we do," said Fink. "Yeah," said Don. "It might also get a hell of a lot more confusing, too." "Me and Don will make sure that the line leading out to the chopper is still intact." Darling shot me a look. "Just be quick. I don't want to lose anyone else if we can help it." "And what if you're one of those things?" asked Don. Darling shrugged. "What if you are?" We set out, me and Fink heading deeper into the facility. Before leaving the canteen door, I watched Don and Darling go until I couldn't see them anymore. "Let's go," I said. "Thank you, Andrew," said Fink. "It means a lot." "Don't worry about it," I told him. It was slow going with Fink keeping the weight off his ankle by keeping a gloved hand on the wall. We passed by the spot we'd initially found Don sitting in, the place that he'd been burned. My mind flashed to those two out in the blizzard, and I hoped like mad that neither one of them were doppelgangers. My foot met something in the dark, and I leaned down to see what it was. Fink stopped, holding the lantern up high so as to illuminate the immediate area. It was the pistol the possibly Doppel Don had dropped. I lifted it to my face and inspected it. It was still fully loaded. So that Don had lied about the gun. It made me feel a little bit better about crippling his knee. I slipped the hammer into my pocket and aimed the gun ahead. I didn't care anymore. If anything came out of the dark, I would fire immediately. We met the part of the hallway where the bunk rooms were, and as we came upon Fink's, I told him to keep a lookout while I opened the door. A sick feeling in the pit of my stomach swelled, and I couldn't figure out why. Something wasn't right. I swung in the door, and the lantern light spilled into the bunk room. A scream caught. I couldn't say anything. There was someone sitting in Fink's desk adjacent to his bed. "Hey!" I screamed at the figure sitting there. "Don't move! I've got my gun on you!" It didn't move. I approached carefully and rounded its shoulders so that I could see its face. It was Anthony Finkel, lead researcher. He was cold to the touch, and a small line of frozen blood had pooled around his temples. I whipped my head around to see Fink standing in the doorway. His figure was blotted out by the light he held in his outstretched hand, but I could see that his shadowy form didn't need the assistance of a wall anymore. His ankle was fine. "Not you!" I cried out. He threw the battery-powered lantern directly into my face, and it met my forehead just as I squeezed the trigger of the pistol in my hand. Finkel let out a groan, but before I knew it, he was straddling me and I was on the floor. The dead Fink toppled out of the chair in our struggle. The living Fink brought his knee to meet me directly in the groin, and I tried slipping the gun beneath his chin. He grabbed the barrel, pointing it directly at the ceiling. I squeezed the trigger 2 more times, and the room was coated in a mesmerizing disco flash as his free hand began finding my throat. Tears pooled in my eyes. I couldn't breathe. I was getting lightheaded, and my vision was beginning to pinpoint. In one last desperate hope, I reached into my pocket. The hammer met his head, and he rolled off me. I scrambled to where the door was, pointing the gun at the threshold. I could barely make out his outline in the low light of the strewn lantern. As he approached the door, I fired the gun until I couldn't anymore. The shots rang in my ears, and I could hear nothing. I watched as he tumbled to the floor. I ran towards the entrance, throwing the gun as I went. I held the hammer, readying it so that if anything came from the shadows, I would immediately smash it in its head. I tripped over a solid object, and I heard the thing let out a whimper. I reared the hammer back as I waited for the thing to find me in the pitch black. A warm tongue met my face. I relaxed and scratched Steve around his ears. The dogs. We had totally forgotten the dogs. "Come on, boy, stay close," I said. I took my steps more deliberately, feeling along the wall until I saw the open door of the canteen ahead. Some small candle glow came from there, and I ran towards it in a mad gamble. Upon meeting the threshold, I saw the canteen was empty. Steve stayed close behind. Maybe we could come back for the other dogs. I dashed towards the entrance, and it felt good to hear the pulse of Steve right behind me. Upon climbing the stairs to the entrance, I passed by a blackened figure. That must have been the fake Jones body. I ignored it as the light coming from the windows of the entrance illuminated my surroundings. I felt a bit better. With only the thought of survival in my mind, I threw the door open and barreled into the blizzard once more, keeping my hold on Steve's collar. I could hardly see a thing, but I found the line leading out to the chopper. I moved, keeping one hand on the dog and the other on the line. The snow blindness was overwhelming, but I'll be damned if I didn't keep up a hard grip on that line. Just over the sound of the whipping snow, I heard Steve barking wildly. I looked to him and saw he had buried his snout in the snow. I leaned down close, searching for the thing that he'd found in the snow, and I saw the frozen face of Donovan staring up at me. He'd been sheared clean in two across his waist. There was no time to mourn. I could feel the cold beginning to envelop me, and I pulled Steve along with me. I'm sure that I was choking him, but I didn't want to leave him, and I did not want to be alone. Through the wind of the storm, I saw the outline of the chopper. I picked up my speed, lifting my legs to fight against the gathered storm. Everything burned. I slapped against the door of the helicopter and felt around to find the handle. I tore it open, dropping my hammer somewhere. Steve dove into the cabin as I fought with the wind to keep the door open. I followed the dog, and the storm slammed it shut behind me. Darling was sitting in the pilot's chair. "You made it." There was a small bit of elation in her voice. She looked at me puzzled. "Where's Fink?" He's one of them," I said, exasperated, trying to catch my breath. The cold forced a cough out of me, and I could barely stop hacking. "Did you see Don on your way? I lost him somewhere out there." She nodded to the white, hellish landscape. I nodded manically. "He was half buried in the snow. I think they got him." She began flipping knobs. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think they cut the gas line." She fell back in her chair before slapping the steering console in front of her. "Can't just one thing go right?" I shook my head and focused on the dog attempting to bury its snout between my legs. Darling looked at me. You, aren't you? I think so. I scratched Steve's head, trying to distract myself. Are you? I asked. Probably, she chortled. Damn it, she pounded the steering console again, but peeked up as she looked out the windshield of the helicopter. I followed her eye line. You see that out there? She squinted and leaned forward without breaking her gaze from what she was looking at. I did. But to be certain, I wiped the frost gathered around the windows and pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands. There was a semicircle of humanoid figures standing in the blizzard, unmoving.